everybody. Welcome to Tintincast. Now, this episode's quite a special one because it is the final Tintin book by Hergé this week, whereas last time it was the final completed Tintin book. Quite sad that we've come to the end of the 24 books.
Yes.
This is this episode 21, Marcus?
Oh yes, 21 today. We've got the keys to the door.
Indeed, we're getting married in the morning. We're not. So yeah, it's Tintin and Alph-Art, or Alph-Art if you prefer, which I read literally this morning. Big story behind this one. It's the 70s now, isn't it?
It is, yes, the late 70s. And Tintin and the Picaros is published in book format in 1976, and it sold an impressive 1.5 million copies. But Hergé was disappointed with the criticism of the book from reviewers and readers alike about the lackluster adventure and the rather cynical politics of the book. Now, by now, obviously, Hergé didn't really rush into writing a new Tintin book as soon as he's completed the last one, but the criticism of the last Picaros book prompted him to start planning Tintin's next adventure pretty much straight away. And the next adventure was initially inspired by a long wait that Hergé had at a Rome airport some years before. And he thought about setting the entire adventure in the airport where Tintin and friends would bump into all the old characters from the adventure series. But although he had lots of ideas for the adventure, he struggled to tie them up into any coherent storyline. Now, at this time, Hergé was still married to Germaine, but he was living with Fanny, which made life pretty complicated. And for outward appearances, he'd still attend public functions with Germaine whenever the publisher cast him and demanded it. But it was in September 1977, when new divorce laws came into effect, that Hergé eventually separates from Germaine. This seems to have been very upsetting for Germaine, of course, who'd given so much of her life to Hergé, both personally and professionally. And it was just a matter of weeks, in fact, before Hergé then marries Fanny. He was 70 and she was just 42. And Hergé had also around this time employed a new young secretary at the time to take over the running of his affairs. And this was a guy called Alain Barin, who's a young and rather inexperienced son of one of Hergé's friends. And many people believe that Barin was almost like a surrogate son to Hergé, who didn't have any children of his own. And Barin helped to prepare for Tintin's 50th anniversary celebrations, which was marked in 1978, first by a reception at the Hôtel Carnival in Paris and an event at the Brussels Hilton. And apparently pretty much every cartoonist in Belgium came to the Brussels event, and Hergé gave them all this limited edition commemorative book, which was rather sarcastically entitled 50 Years of Utterly Happy Work, with a drawing that Hergé had done on the cover, basically depicting Hergé in a ball and chain in a convict's uniform with Tintin standing over him brandishing a whip. And there was also around this time a major exhibition mounted at the Palais des Beaux-Arts in Brussels called the Imaginary Museum of Tintin, which included some of the artifacts that had inspired the series. And in what seems to have been a stunt pretty reminiscent of the early stunts that Hergé did in his career. One of the artifacts, the Arambaya fetish from the broken ear, was reported to have gone missing during the exhibition. So this is something that had happened in a previous publicity stunt. And although Hergé seemed to be enjoying all of this adulation, by 1979, he was starting to feel increasingly tired, unwell. And by September of that year, doctors had diagnosed Hergé with osteomyelofibrosis, which is a blood disease where the white blood cells no longer regenerate. And to counteract the disease, Hergé begins to have fortnightly full blood transfusions. And although this was obviously quite upsetting to Hergé and his routine, he carries on with grim humor. He tells his friends that whenever he's had this transfusion that he's refilled his fuel tank. But he's also struggling with his dreams and nightmares again, as he did before Tintin in Tibet. And this time his dreams aren't white. They're dark and foreboding, and they feature his ex-wife Germaine, and it's quite guilt-ridden again. However, despite all of this, and despite his illness, Hergé seems to have taken a renewed interest in Tintin's next adventure. And now it's evolved from this idea of being set in the airport to being a mystery around art forgeries and fake prophets and gurus. The art forgery element of the book seems to have been inspired by a guy called Fernand Legros, who's an art dealer who between the mid 1950s and late 1960s sold the forged artworks of this guy called Elmire de Horry. And I'm sure we'll talk about them during this particular episode. So you've prepared your book report for homework? Can you read it out for class?
No, my dog ate it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, sir. Yeah, there's so much to look at in everything you've just said, because I would have loved to have seen the set in an airport book. I think that's a great idea. That could have really worked. He might have come back to that if he'd lived longer, maybe if he was a bit younger and he had all these ideas going. I love the idea of him bumping into people at an airport. And because it's sort of shown that Castafiore Emerald showed that you could set Tintin in one location indoors and it would work. And there's my doggy. See, he did eat my homework. He's just run off it. Yeah, getting into the actual story, which begins with Haddock having a strange dream about a giant woodpecker trying to eat him. That's what Haddock's dreaming of, and his dreams are really about Castafiore not leaving him alone. And obviously then she turns up on the phone and she's coming to visit and all that, and because the book's unfinished, it's immediately a curio. You're like, okay, well, is this a real book? Is it worth reading? Is it part of the canon? But it is business as usual. It's funny, even when you get into the story, even though it's sketches, and I'm looking at this edition, which is pretty much the one everyone can get. And it's a script that he'd written down and storyboards that he'd scribbled. So first of all, you get this amazing insight into Hergé's creative process, which I absolutely love, especially the first page where you get this, sort of slightly more advanced, and then later on, as he's dashing through the sketches, it becomes more and more scribbly. But the whole script is there as he wanted to do it. And it's a story about Tintin. Well, it starts off like the previous few books, which is Marlinspike Hall, Tintin and Haddock. Haddock's being pestered by Castafiore. But then whether it's because Hergé developed the story or not, Tintin takes over, which is great, because in the last book, they were criticizing Tintin being a bit of a backseat passenger. Tintin takes over and says, well, this is unusual. Someone's disappeared in the art world, a sort of eminent figure in the art world. And he gets sucked up into this story of forgery and gangsters and car chases and stuff. And again, it's like a classic Tintin story. It's just set in the art world, and it takes a few pot shots at the art community and the snobbery of the art world, and how everyone reveres high art, and actually what it ends up being is a sort of expose of how art can be forged and passed off, and people can be conned. But in the end, it's the gears that drive it are gangsters, greed, fame, money, all that kind of stuff. So in a way, it does feel like it's instantly unusual, because it's a series of sketches that he hadn't finished. It feels like a Tintin book throughout, I think.
I don't know what I expected. I hadn't read this book before. I was aware of Alph-Art, but I just assumed, I don't know, I'd made this assumption that Hergé had just gone crazy and drawn kind of a cubist Tintin book, and everyone was too embarrassed to publish it or something like that. I hadn't realized that it's actually, as you say, it's business as usual. Starts very much like the Castafiore Emerald. They're all at Marlinspike. Yeah, and in fact, most of the book is based around Marlinspike, in kind of the town and village around Marlinspike. And it's only at the very end of the book that they sort of decamp to chase the villains to their lair off the coast of Italy. But otherwise, it's nice being back at Marlinspike.
Yeah, and it does feel like, I know he started to get a little bit criticized although criticized is probably a strong word, because people love it when throwbacks to other Tintin adventures are mentioned. The Sheik and his son Abdullah and all that. It's mentioned. Oh God, him again. The Thompsons turn up. Castafiore, Calculus, they're all turn up. It's like all his mates are popping around for another adventure. But it's just the unusual thing about, other than he didn't finish it and he died before it was finished, that's obviously the talking point. I mean, you can tell from the cover, this is not going to be a usual Tintin adventure. But it's the fact that he just kind of takes these characters and says, well, let's investigate another series of wrongdoings by bad guys and it just happens to be in the art world, and I think that it gets a bit potentially surreal later when the bad guy threatens to cover Tintin in plaster and turn him into a living, like, well, a work of art, and so no one will know that he's killed Tintin, and Tintin has actually become art. When you describe it, it sounds a bit surreal, but actually it's not. He's literally just doing a James Bond thing of he's gonna just kill him.
I mean, the surrealism is kind of just inherent in that art world anyway, this kind of crazy Alph-Art, which Castafiore and a lot of the great and good are sort of holding up as this wonderful new art form. And everyone at Marlinspike's just completely puzzled about, what is this stuff that Captain Haddock has brought home from the gallery?
Yeah, and everyone keeps asking what, I'm just on this page here, page 14, what is it? And Nestor says, what is it?
Yeah, what does it do?
It's an H, what's it for? It's not for anything. Which is great, because that's where, again, there's a lot in this book about, what art is. And art is not for anything. Art is for art's sake. You can do it for commerce and so forth. But the amount of people who say, I don't see the point in, a Turner seascape, or it's like, what's the point of it? I'm like, well, it's an expression of that person. That's what the point of it is.
And Hergé himself was collecting a lot of modern artwork around this time. This is him sort of pointing fun at himself a bit. I mean, his home was apparently very much like a modern art gallery by this stage.
And God, I wish I'd been to that exhibition where they had the fetish of the broken ear and all that.
Oh, God, yes.
Imagine going to that and seeing all these artifacts.
By this stage, obviously, Hergé is pretty fed up with Tintin, but it seems like by throwing in these elements of the modern art world, philosophy and this idea of the gurus, this is all stuff that Hergé was exploring in his private life, and it's almost like that was keeping him interested at this stage. I can get behind another Tintin book if it contains loads of other stuff that I'm interested in, not so much Tintin.
Well, that's it. You and I know as creative people, with your music and writing, and I know with my films and writing, that you feel the urge to create something, even if it doesn't. I could sit and write a film script. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a film one day. It could be an unfinished thing, but you have to set off to write the thing. You've probably got a bunch of unfinished songs, scribbled down, half finished ideas.
And this is why I'm really interested to hear your opinion on this one, because as a screenwriter and director as well, you must be, very familiar with this kind of, dealing with all of these outpouring of ideas and trying to mold them into some kind of shape.
Absolutely. I've got sketchbooks from stuff that either did or didn't come to fruition, and it's all, I can see what I was aspiring to do. And in the beginning, you come up with all these crazy ideas. And I think, hopefully when the Zomblog movie comes out and eventually gets to people's homes, when it comes out on disc and streaming and stuff, eventually people will be, we've done a lot of making of footage as well and material. People will be able to see the sort of 40 minutes of film that we cut out of it. And that's one of the things I loved about Alph-Art, is that, it's the creative process, which is I'm fascinated by. I'm sort of more fascinated by the creative process some days than I am with the actual finished thing, even though, you go see a movie and you enjoy the movie because it's been presented to you in a finished form. But I love sketchbooks. I love people like Guillermo del Toro. I love his sketchbooks and his scribbles and his ideas, because it's those ideas people need to keep going. I think a lot of creative people are not encouraged to daydream and write stuff down and fill sketchbooks with notes and ideas. It's in that sort of throwing together of ideas that things happen, even if all the ideas don't make it in. It's very rare that you sit and write a 90-page script and every single idea from draft one is there forever. With my new film that I've written, we've spent 2 years developing the 6th draft. So that's 2 years of Zoom conversations with me and my producers, and it's a creative process, and sometimes it's maddening, because you're like, one day we're going to make this into a film, but at the moment we're talking about words on a page. You know what I mean?
So yeah, it's just the time that Hergé and co were living with books by this point, because Bob de Moor, who worked very closely with Hergé on Picaros and on this book, Bob de Moor was worried when Hergé said, I'm thinking about a new book, because Bob de Moor says, well, Tintin and the Picaros took a long time, and that's not good. When we began another story, I thought, yes, okay, but how much time is it going to take? 7 years, 10 years? I was a little afraid. I was 18 years younger than Hergé. I had more drive. And also with this book, apparently for the first time in about 40 years, Hergé has started this adventure with no clear idea of how it would end. So he was kind of feeling his way, and that comes across, reading the notes that he's made. He's constantly, there's lots of questions scribbled in there. There's lots of different pathways he could have taken.
Yes, I love that at the back when he's sort of coming up with, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this. Is Haddock an art collector now? Is he? How heavily is he involved in it?
It's because there's this thing about, well, Haddock is now dry because Calculus in the previous book has invented a tablet that puts him off alcohol. So he's kind of put all of his energies into become this great collector of Alph-Art.
You spend the book going, what is Alph-Art, and why is everyone talking about it? Is it this? Why has he got the letter H? Is that what it is? It's just a bunch of big letters. Is that the new thing? I love the nuts and bolts of the story. I actually it's a memorable, even though when you look at it, it's a bunch of sketches. I love the mechanics of the car chase and Tintin finding the crashed car. And then also he goes back and he interviews the assistant and accuses her of being the spy. And that's all very evocative. You can imagine it. You can, even though you can't really see it. There's a terrific little sketch here where he's just looking at her and saying, "I think you're the one," and she's going, "Moi?" Just that. Even it comes across in that little scribble. And this, the sort of haughty secretary he talks to as well. It's still very fun, even though it's not the Lean Claire, the final version.
And a lot of it is there. For me, 90% of the story is there. And it is such a shame that it wasn't completed, because it felt like Hergé was maybe a few pages from really knowing what happened at the end. But I mean, it's interesting how the characters have changed. We talked a bit about Haddock and his obsession with artwork now, but Tintin, for the first time in many books, is cast as a proper boy reporter. It's the gallery owner, Forcart, who wants to make contact with Tintin because there's a story he's unearthed about these art forgeries. And so suddenly Tintin is a proper boy reporter again.
Yes, I noticed that when there's, are you Tintin's friend to Haddock?
Yeah.
And Haddock, I am, yeah. But I also love the sort of, I know we've talked in previous episodes how Hergé felt that there was a snobbery about comics. And this is something we've talked about. Again, I can relate because I'm not super famous like Hergé, but or super successful, but I make comedy horrors and horror films, and I know there's a lot of snobbery about those, and occasionally you run into it. It's nonsense, because horror fans don't care. But horror is sometimes seen as a little bit of, some people are a bit ashamed of saying, oh, it's a horror, oh, it's high horror. It's like, it's just a horror movie. It's fine. Horror is, I think Lucio Fulci said, horror is entertainment. Horror is mainstream. People go to a horror film the same way they go to a fairground, is to get scared and shaken up. And some horror movies are, way ahead of some other movies, I think. Doesn't have to be high art. So I think you have to fight that snobbery. And I think Hergé felt that snobbery about cartoons. He felt that people thought cartoons and comics were silly. So he felt in a way that he had to, in his career, either justify the fact that he's drawing Tintin and not sort of say, all right, well, I'm going to go into fine art then. And then come up with Alph-Art at the end of his career, which basically says, all right, then I'll do Tintin set in the art world and I'll rip the hell out of it,
Yes.
Perfect, really.
And it really parallels the sort of pretensions over the classical and contemporary arts versus what he was doing as a cartoonist as well. He sort of explores quite a lot of that within the pages.
Yeah, and the fact that it's got Bianca Castafiore in it again, and Hergé, he's enjoyed the whole series laying into opera, and opera is considered high art. But that's the thing, is some people, they get a bit snobby about high art, low art. He's enjoyed taking the mick out of that for 24 books. So this is not new ground for him to take the mick out of the hoi polloi, is it?
And Castafiore, this is all set in train, of course, when Haddock jumps into a gallery to hide from Castafiore, but it turns out that Castafiore is obsessed by this artist Ramo Nash, the artist of Alph-Art. But equally, Ramon Nash is also a fraud because he is known for this Alph-Art that he makes, which is being displayed in this gallery in Brussels, presumably. But what he's doing behind the scenes is, faking all the masters and making a lot of money. Well, he's not personally making a lot of money. There is this shady figure called Engadine Akas, who is an art dealer almost, and is selling his work as passing off his fakes as the real thing.
I love the way they get there as well. I love the way they have to go to this island off Naples. And it's it's like we must find more about Engadine. And then he goes, well, where can we find him? And they go, oh, it's in an island across from Naples. And then it cuts to some hours later, an airliner lands at Naples airport. And Haddock just says, this is sheer, deliberate, unqualified masochism to come 2,000 kilometers by air. And Tintin goes, and another 2 hours by sea. But he just do that in 2 lines. It goes from, we're going to have to go to, well, we're there. And again, that's Hergé just sort of sending up the whole globe-trotting element of it, and suddenly they're there. Love that bit. Deliberate, unqualified masochism.
And it's quite interesting how these different strands come together, because this Engadine Akas is introduced really into the story as a guru, and he's playing in a theatre locally. It's really they get thrown onto the scent by this Martine van der Zandt, the gallery assistant, and how often do we say this in Tintincast, a potential love interest for Tintin?
Yeah, I know. And of course it doesn't lead anywhere, but it would be nice if in the next book, she popped up again. And
how often in Hergé do we have a character that's introduced that has, say, more than 5 lines of dialogue and then don't appear again? It's like if you have 4 or more lines of dialogue in a Hergé book, you're going to be brought back time and time again. So I've no doubt that Martine would have been either a more important part of the end of this book or part of future books.
Maybe Hergé just decided to give Tintin a little bit of a spark of a love interest at the end.
Well, I think so. I mean, apparently Hergé was he was furiously involved in trying to finish this book in the months and weeks leading up to his death. And he would be dropping hints apparently to his friends about this kind of secret ending to this new book, and everyone, you'll be surprised. And so who knows? But I kind of get the sense that maybe this was the sunset that Hergé was maybe trying to send Tintin off into. And it's weird actually just to have a female in a Hergé book that isn't sort of old or matronly, or this is just a kind of a young lady who works in the gallery.
Yes, which parallels Hergé's own life, doesn't it? He's interested in a young lady who works for him.
And it's quite good the way that she almost ties the different elements of the story together, and it's the way Tintin finds his way into this gang of forgers, in that Martine is wearing this large E pendant around her neck, which relates to this guru who's given it to her, this Engadine Akas.
Yeah.
But it obviously is very much in the style of the Alph-Art that is in the gallery as well. So there's then this connection found between the Engadine Akas and Ramon Nash, who's then creating these fake masterpieces for Engadine as well. So that's how it all kind of comes together when Tintin realizes that there's some kind of eavesdropping going on in the gallery, and they work out that it must be embedded within this pendant that Martine has.
Yeah, I like the fact that he's just so like, it was you. And then, it was, but indirectly. It's not her fault that she was giving information out. But they work out from that. I like the fact that they work out that it must be someone nearby, because the radio's only shortwave.
Yeah.
And he's got that sort of Sherlock Holmes thing going on.
It's quite an intricate plot, actually. And obviously this Engadine Akas is based very much on this real life figure of Fernand Legros, the art dealer who conspired to forge these artworks. And Legros was actually immortalized in a book by Clifford Irving called Fake in 1969, and also in Orson Welles' documentary F for Fake in 1974. So he's been quite an inspiration to a number of different artists. And Ramo Nash is a real character as well, quite a talented guy. And in the real life, I think they bought him a house in Ibiza to do this from. And in Hergé's book, it's Ischia, I think, of Italian coast.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, all artists have assistants and apprentices who finish their work. And obviously, forgery is a different thing, but every artist has got someone that finishes off the work. And Hergé at this point had loads of people working for him, so they could have actually gone off and done this book. But I do like the fact that he said he was very clear that this would not be continued in the event of his death. Tintin would not, and that's what Fanny decided as well. She said, yeah, all right, I'm going to release his sketchbooks. But this book is not going to be officially finished in the proper clear-lean style. But it's this guy Rodier actually did a version. So if you like reading this, Hergé's version, and you can't bear not to see it complete, there is a version out there. I don't know if it's like officially available. I saw it. It was on YouTube. Someone had uploaded it.
I think it's pretty unofficial in terms that it was never given approval by Moulin's Art, the Hergé Foundation. No, and I think that frustrated Bob de Moor because Bob de Moor, I believe, felt that the book was very close to being finished, and Bob de Moor has obviously worked so closely with Hergé previously. He felt that he could finish it in the proper style, and it does seem a shame for this book because it does feel like this could have been that kind of final part of the story.
But yeah, as we were saying just before we came on here, we were saying, yes, you can go off but we can look at this version and go, well, I can see what's happening there because of the story explains what's happening. You can see there's a crash car there. You can see Tintin looking there. You can see the road ahead. You can see what's happening in this car crash and so forth. And you read the script. When you watch the literal version by Rodier, which, it's like, yeah, okay, he's taken it and he's made it in the style of Hergé would have done it, but it's not as good because it's not Hergé's version. And I don't mean that in a sort of slavishly completist way, but that version is not Tintin. It's less satisfying than seeing Hergé's sketchbooks, even if Hergé had got one of his assistants to finish it.
I think it's a really interesting one because there'll be this whole debate around, Tintin, the image of Tintin, and how the people who have rights over Tintin have kept very tight control over that over the years and really, really prevented anybody from taking that image and doing anything else with it beyond these sort of 24 books that we have. I found it really interesting seeing Yves Rodier's book because I thought that, I agree with you. Obviously, it's not quite there in terms of visually with the other books, but I think he does a really good job of actually bringing some of these storylines to a conclusion. And, we've been sitting with Hergé now for about 6 months, and it seems that he doesn't take any liberties. He does suggest that this... Martine van der Zandt might, invite Tintin to meet her parents. That seems like a good, wholesome thing that maybe would happen in a Tintin book. And there is this question around Engadine Akas, because even in Hergé's version, Tintin is constantly looking at him and saying, "Hey, this guy reminds me of someone." So you think, okay, so who could this be? There's obviously something here that, and he's unmasked as Rastapopoulos, of course.
Yeah.
In Rodier's version as well. I mean, that was certainly, I believe that Hergé was thinking to bring back Rastapopoulos.
Yes, and I like the fact that at one point there's a sort of hint of who it could be, and I think at one point he's there, and in the audience for this art guy is Sakharin.
Yes, it's interesting the old characters that make a comeback here. There's Sakharin, there's Gibbons from the Blue Lotus, there's Trickler from the Broken Ear.
Yeah, and I wonder, at some point, when Hergé was writing these books, what he thought, I could put Sakharin in there, or if he was just he had a burning desire to see that character again.
Well, it's almost like he's bringing back all of these sort of old adversaries for a final showdown. It's like, let's assemble all of Tintin's adversaries in one place and let's have this final showdown.
Which could have worked for the airport one, couldn't it? You know what I mean? You could imagine all the various despots and dictators and political figures and scoundrels and gangsters coming and going between the terminals, and Tintin has to somehow foil it. I mean, it could have been good.
And there's also some sort of real, sort of breaking the fourth wall again, there's some real life artists who get brought into the story, whether it's some of the forgeries that are happening, but there's also this César, and it was like the Nouveau Realism movement, and he used to do these compressions of things. So he used to sort of get metal and kind of compact it into like cars being compacted down into cubes and things like that. And he also had this kind of expansionist movement where he'd used these molten plastics to expand things so they're much bigger or they're kind of misshaped or whatever. And I think that this is how Hergé thinks that Tintin is going. This is going to be the showdown. That Tintin is going to be turned into a modern sculpture. Tintin is going to be drowned in molten plastic and then put on view in a modern gallery with the title "Young Reporter" or something.
I know it's quite sick, really.
It is quite sinister, isn't it?
Very sinister. It's James, but we've had gangsters saying, "I'm going to get you. I'm going to stop him. I'm going to put a stop to him." But they haven't sort of gone into detail. Or I'm going to put you in this easily escapable trap and then leave. Particularly like a Roger Ward, isn't it? I'm just going to leave and assume that everything went to plan. What? Yes, it is like that. And then when you actually see Rodio's version, it's actually quite disturbing to see all this hot plastic coming down on Tintin, and he's shouting, "Help! Help! Ah!"
Yeah, I'm drowning. I'm dying.
I'm dying. And then Haddock very quickly, axes him out of it in Rodio's version, which is what would happen, I imagine. It's one of those things. As soon as Tintin's in danger, you think, well, Snowy's going to rescue him.
Yeah.
So I'm not that worried. So I'm glad we didn't have to endure that in Hergé's version.
It is quite gritty and I mean, it reminded me very much of some of Patricia Highsmith's Ripley novels, not the first Talented Mr. Ripley, but in book 2, Ripley Underground, he gets very involved in art forgeries, and this is how Ripley makes a lot of his money. And I just wonder if Hergé was reading that. I know he was inspired by the story of Fernand Legros and Elmire Doré, but probably Patricia Highsmith was as well. And her novel has a lot of similarities, actually, Ripley Underground.
Yeah, we've mentioned Hitchcock quite a lot. And I know, someone on the YouTube channel the other day, I think it was, or Twitter said, do you think Hitchcock read Hergé?
Interesting.
And they were saying that they felt that Torn Curtain was quite similar to the Calculus Affair, which would make sense because it did come afterwards. And I said, yeah, well, I watched Torn Curtain a few months ago, and there's a scene on a bus where they're trying to escape the country, and all the characters on the bus kind of conspire to keep the main characters, Paul Newman and Julie Andrews, safe from the bad guys. It did strike me as very Tintin, but yeah, who knows,
And Frantic was very like that. I mean, I guess any thriller with a kind of strong MacGuffin is going to have that sort of Hitchcockian ring to it. And in this case, the MacGuffin's kind of the Alph-Art, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And Frantic, we kind of worked out Polanski was possibly directly.
There was a direct connection anyway. Yeah.
There was a connection, which I think we did a few episodes ago, but it was a definite, the timing of it was very odd if it wasn't directly lifted from Hergé. Polanski definitely was inspired somehow by Hergé.
I mean, Hergé was obviously still trying at his death to grapple with some of these issues and how he was going to sort of paint himself out of this corner. He'd obviously got to the point where Tintin was about to be led off to his doom, and that's pretty much where the book ended. But there was a few things that I kind of wondered about. I mean, if Alph-Art is so big with the intelligentsia and people like Castafiore and other celebrities are buying it, why doesn't Ash need to fake other dead artists' paintings? That kind of was one of my questions.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of story strands that he hadn't quite gelled together. I mean, if you go through the last 10 pages of the book, it's all kind of his other ideas. I think he could have brought the strands together a bit more expertly if you had to think about it. Because, it would be to do with, specifically Alph-Art would be the MacGuffin, or the H would lead to something, or there'd be something in the, this piece that Haddock's got. It'd be more like there's something to do with that H.
Yeah.
Something in it,
and the whole thing around Rastapopoulos posing as this fake prophet, this fake guru. Yeah. Again, it's kind of like, well, why? He may be making a bit of money that way, but obviously he's making most of his money through these forgeries.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at is it's a sketch, isn't it? I mean, some of it's obviously literally a sketch, but I think Alph-Art as a book is a sketch of what's
Yeah.
going to be something. And he hadn't brought them all together. He hadn't brought the story strands together. And that's what happens when if you're writing a long story with loads of different characters, you think at one point you think you've got it. And then someone you're working with or yourself points out that, hang on a minute, wouldn't it be better if we took that element and give it to that character and then have them. But if you looked at an early draft, you'd be like, oh, this isn't complete. Which is why you present the complete version, because you're like, this is the one I've worked out. Whereas this, Hergé would probably be like, oh, I can't believe they published that. I haven't finished it.
I mean, that's probably what gives it its slightly surrealistic, dreamlike logic almost, that there are these things that haven't quite been thought through. And then there's also kind of the weird thing that because Captain Haddock is sober, he's sort of driving in it as well. He's kind of we don't see Captain Haddock driving very often.
No, I like the fact he does get a sailing reference in there. He said something like, "What fair wind blew you here?" to the Thompsons, I think he says. But yeah, it's a kind of a fitting end, and I'm glad that they published it, because otherwise you'd get Tintin and the Picaros would be the last story, and that was received 50% warmly, 50% with a bit more chill.
And as we said last week, it really does. That's a book that kind of peters out. That Tintin and Haddock kind of disappear from the last few pages, and it just doesn't feel sensible ending for Tintin.
Can you imagine if Hergé had gone out with a real cynical note and he'd killed off Tintin and had him turned into a piece of art, and then he'd put him in a gallery and said, "This is Tintin."
What do you think? I mean, we know what Yves Rodier thinks about the ending. Well, what do you think happened?
I mean, I think it's going to be fairly. This might be quite boring, but I think he does get rescued by Haddock or Snowy, probably Snowy. And he does, but I think there would be a tying together, like you said, of the themes. It'd be something more to do with modern art, some kind of twist at the end with the H and the modern art and the Alph-Art thing, rather than copying Picasso's and Rodin and whatever. Rodin, the sculptor. But yeah, it would have a sort of a comical ending, I think, and we go back to Marlinspike. You'd have something about Haddock having art hanging in Marlinspike and deciding to open Marlinspike as a gallery or something like that. You know what I mean?
He'd have to get his thirst for whiskey back as well. You just thought.
Yeah, I think he would actually. I think he'd be like, maybe I'm going to give up collecting art and just go back to collecting whiskey. And then you could have had a whole, But in the end, we get 24 books, and it's actually fascinating that this is the last one, because like I said, I read it this morning, but I read about it a couple of months ago. When I found out we'd be doing it, and I always thought, like you, I thought it was a bit more surreal and a bit more of this is going to be a weird one. This is going to be a Tintin idea of a Tintin story, but it's just a story in development. That just happens to be set in the art world, and Hergé is an artist. It's quite meta in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways, it's just a memorable Tintin book,
So with that in mind, should we give it a score as to what we think it could have been?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I'm going to give it a 6 because it really captured my imagination. I think it's funny. Yes, it's incomplete. It's interesting. It's intriguing. It's original. And I love the fact that it's incomplete. It's not, for me, it's not like, I wish it was complete. I don't wish it was complete. I'm glad it's not. I'm glad it is what it is.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to give it a 6. I think the unfinished book is just like a treasure trove, because it gives such an insight into Hergé's creative process. And it's a hard story to tell because it encompasses so many stories, complete and unfinished, including the real life Rama, Nash and Tintin, who obviously inspired it, but Hergé's own story in terms of his brushes with the modern art world, and what came after his death in terms of, the wrangles over the years about preserving the image of Tintin and the commerciality of that, how you preserve that and how you make money from that as well, because that's a whole other tale which we're not going to be telling in these videos. But the vast amount of the story, I think, is there. I think it was slightly a shame that Bob de Moor wasn't allowed to complete the work, because I think Bob de Moor, most of the story was there. Bob de Moor had a handle on Hergé's creative process. He had the visual style down, and I thought it would have been nice to think that he could have finished it. But I agree that just having it in this form just gives us such an insight into Hergé's working process that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Yes, it is what it is. That's something I'm a big fan of, things that are what they are because of reasons. It sounds very simplified. It's like going into Hergé's workshop and seeing his drawing board and going, oh wow, this is going to be great, and then him going, and then Tintin does this and Haddock does, and what we're going to have, haven't figured out the ending yet, but this, and finding that fascinating. And some people are completists; they want it to be finished. Yes, it would be great to see the finished version, but it didn't get finished, and I love the process. I love sketchbooks. I'm not an artist myself, but I'm a writer. But I'm definitely a frustrated artist because I used to be able to draw a lot, and then I just sort of stopped and I went into writing instead. And as anyone will tell you, if you don't keep drawing, you lose the ability to do it. Actually, one of the most inspiring places I went was the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, where you could see all of Gaudi's process as you went up to the tower, and you could see that he planned to build 16 towers, I think it was originally, and how this was ongoing. You saw all his sketchbooks and stuff. And again, we went to the Picasso Museum, where they had one room dedicated to one painting, but it showed you the sketches that got to the painting all the way around the room until you saw the final painting, and that was just brilliant. So this is like Hergé's version of that. It's like a gallery in a book, which is appropriate for the story.
Okay, well, shall we bring these 21 episodes to some sort of conclusion?
Yeah.
So, towards the very end of his life, Hergé found a renewed interest in Tintin and his adventures, and he was frantically working on Alph-Art secretly in the last few months before his death. Apparently, he'd be dropping intriguing hints to friends about what might become of Tintin. However, as it stands, the last lines that we have for the adventurer from Enderdine Cass, and they read, "The hour has come for you to be transformed into a César." And then we see a pencil sketch of Tintin as a condemned man being led away, and that seems quite apt. Hergé, for the first time, does leave Tintin to his fate. There'd be no last-minute reprieve for Tintin or his creator, and Hergé died on the evening of the 3rd of March, 1983. He was 75. And in the final years before his death, Hergé spent a lot of time studying Eastern philosophy. While Fanny's interests were around Hinduism, Hergé began to study more about Buddhism and Taoism. In fact, after his death, His Holiness the Dalai Lama gave the International Campaign for Tibet's Light of Truth Award to the Hergé Foundation in recognition of Hergé's portrayal of friendship in Tintin in Tibet. As well as rereading the Tao, which his friend Zhang had introduced him to, Hergé became fascinated with the work of a French nuclear physicist and philosopher, Jean-Émile Charron, who wrote many books exploring the scientific basis for the existence of some sort of soul or afterlife, and an idea that exists in Buddhism as well, of course. And Hergé even met up with Charron to discuss those ideas. Hergé was also thinking more and more of Zhang, and he'd obviously now traced his old friend and mentor to Shanghai, and they'd started corresponding again, albeit in a limited way given Chinese censorship. And a journalist called Gérard Vallée was also taking an interest in Hergé's friendship with Zhang, and he'd started to try and arrange to bring Zhang to Belgium for a reunion with his old friend, which had proved almost impossible due to the Chinese authorities. But finally, on the 18th of March, 1981, Vallée managed to fly Zhang to Brussels, and there was a highly emotional reunion between Hergé and his old friend at the airport in front of members of the media from around the world. And Zhang went on to stay at Hergé's home, and should really have been the perfect ending for the tale between those two friends. But as often seems to be the case in Hergé's life, the real life Zhang couldn't live up to the idealized version of his friend that Hergé had in his mind, and the two men seemed to spend an uneasy few weeks together trying to reconnect with each other. And whether the years living under a brutal Chinese regime had changed Zhang, or whether the reunion had just been too overwhelming for the two, Zhang's stay with Hergé seems to have led to disappointment, and Zhang returned to China a few weeks later. And though they parted on good terms, the two men wouldn't see each other again. And by late 1981, Hergé's health had taken a turn for the worst. He was struck down with double pneumonia, and it became necessary for him to start to undergo weekly blood transfusions. And he was unable to take an active role in Studios Hergé anymore. He was at least able in his last few years and months to spend time in his beloved Switzerland, where the climate helped him. He wasn't able to do much more than read there. And he did consult a range of experts in Western medicine, and as well as Chinese doctors suggested by Zhang, in the hope of finding some cure to his illness. But on 25th of February 1983, he suffered a heart attack, fell into a coma. He was cared for by Fanny and his doctors at an intensive care unit in Brussels until he passed away a week later on the 3rd of March. And despite the obvious criticisms of Hergé during his lifetime for some of the choices and his stance during the war, the media in France and in Belgium were united in celebrating his life, and they ran stories and tributes to Hergé for weeks after his death. And while there wasn't any detailed will left, Fanny had been put in charge of the studios, and Hergé had made it clear that he didn't want others to continue to produce the adventures of Tintin. Bob Damore, who still worked for the studios and collaborated closely with Hergé on many books, was keen to finish Alph-Art, and Fanny provided Damore with all the material Hergé had produced for the book so far. But after a while, Fanny decided to stop the production of the final adventure. And in 1986, Studios Hergé were wound up by Fanny and replaced by the Hergé Foundation, which instead of producing any new material was solely occupied with protecting the rights of Tintin and the Tintin series. So given the work Damore had done in piecing together the final adventure, it was decided to release Hergé's unfinished manuscript in full. And this was published in France by Casterman in 86 and translated into English and published by Egmont in English in 1990. To date, over 250 million Tintin books have been sold.
Wow. And half of those are to us in various languages. Yeah. What a legacy, eh? I mean, I would have discovered Tintin in the mid 80s, I guess, when I was at primary school. I think we had them, some of them. But I seem to have bought most of my copies when I was 13, 14. Because they're all published in 1988, my copies. It might have just been when I started to get pocket money or a paper round or babysitting, whatever I did when I was 14, because I was able to get, the rest of the books. But yeah, I think this is the first time I've read them in order over a sustained period. I used to just sort of pick them up and read them occasionally. And I really enjoyed reading them. I mean, they're better than I remembered too. They're very dense in terms of entertainment and detail. And
it's been a whole different experience coming back to them as an adult and reading them with adult eyes, and also, I suppose, taking into account the situation in the world as they were written, the situation in Hergé's life, and that does bring, I think, another depth to the experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think. Yes, you can read them, especially when you're a kid, you're going to read them and you're not really going to study much, but you might not study about Hergé, but as you get older, you're going to want to know a bit more context. And I think it does enrich them to, I knew bits of it. I knew that Hergé didn't write overtly political stories during the war because he was obviously having to publish them in a Nazi publication. So he started to go incredibly fantastical and let's do stuff about treasure hunts and the moon and all that kind of stuff. But they're all the richer for that he decided to do different stories. And he was a very creative person, Hergé, in terms of the way he, not just because he was an artist, but in that terms of creativity, but also the way he decided to tell those stories and in what manner he decided to tell those stories. He just kept going. He always had inspiration to tell another Tintin story. Even right to the end, he didn't retire from Tintin, which is incredible. He didn't spend the last 10 years of his life as a crotchety old man going, don't talk to me about Tintin. You know what I mean? He yes, it was hard for him sometimes because that was the legacy, but he was still doing it. It's incredible. I hope, if I make it to 75, which incidentally is both my parents' age, I hope I'm still working. I hope I'm still scribbling ideas down, and that's the dream, isn't it?
I think it's such a joy in life to allow yourself to be creative.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's a great saying, which is the creative adult is the child who survived, because there have been times in everyone's life, I think, when they've been encouraged to stop daydreaming. You can, obviously, if you're Hergé, you can make a living out of it, but he didn't have an easy life. He didn't have it easy. He didn't sit on his millions on a yacht enjoying. He kept working and he kept plugging away, and he had a lot of troubles. That's what I find interesting about Hergé. It reminds me a bit of Douglas Adams, who's another writer that I admire. He hated deadlines, and his publisher used to have to lock him in a hotel room for a week to make sure he finished his books, which I love, because I can relate. You find you're like, I want to create this story. I want to make a living as a writer. Then as soon as the authority figure goes, well, have you written that book? You go, get lost, get off my back. And I think Hergé disappeared so many times because he was just stressed.
Yeah, and it seems to be the only way he could get out of just disappear from the face of the earth. Yeah,
I love it. And his magazine were like, George, where are you? Can you come home, please? You've been away 6 weeks and you need to publish this book. And he was like, go away. I'm incommunicado, go away. So he was every inch the artist in lots of ways.
Well, it has been a joy, my friend. Can I give a few thank yous? I wanted to thank everyone who's joined us for this series, anyone who's sent comments in, put us right about Tintin and Hergé facts, and generally said nice things about what we've been doing. I'd like to thank Sean Lai and the late, great Harry Thompson, whose biographies about Hergé we relied on for this series, and a great book we've been consulting called Wikipedia. It's long but worth the read. And thanks to Christine Bougie for the theme tune, and thanks to Miles for not mentioning Indiana Jones this week.
You know what? I did that deliberately, but also I've got nothing Indiana Jonesy to refer to this week, because it's not a particularly Indiana Jonesy story. But halfway through the Zoom today, I was like, I haven't mentioned Indiana Jones, and I'm not gonna.
Well, this isn't the end. We will return.
We will. Yes, obviously we've covered Hergé's 24 books, but there is more to both Hergé and us that we have yet to gas on about. So I'm really chuffed that we got over 20,000 views at this point, haven't we, for the series? We didn't expect it that at all. We didn't expect so much of an uptake of comments and enthusiasm, and it's been something we've done for us to enjoy. And then the fact that other people are enjoying it is just the best reason to do something online, I think, is that everyone's enjoying it. So thank you very much for the support.
Thank you for joining us, and take care until we see you next time on Tintincast.
We might see you down the Tintin shop somewhere.
Bye now.
Bye.